Welcome to Extreme Now Virtual, streaming to you live straight from our home office. Today, we're going to tackle what's real and what's hype when it comes to Wi-Fi 6 and 5G. You've heard all the hype before. 5G is going to change everything. The arrival of 5G will unlock the full potential of VR and AR. 5G will make Wi-Fi obsolete. There's not much value in moving to Wi-Fi 6. Wi-Fi 6 is one of the most advanced technologies that meets today's demands for digital transformation. Or my personal favorite, 5G can be used for mind control. Okay, so joining me today, we have two experts on 5G and Wi-Fi 6 technology, Perry Carell, Director of Product Marketing from Extreme Networks, and Roger Billings, Chief Architect from Cradlepoint. Perry, Roger, thank you both so much for joining me today. Are you two ready to help me separate the hype from the reality when it comes to 5G and Wi-Fi 6?
Oh, absolutely. And the easiest thing to say is everything you just said was wrong. No, it's just they're both going to coexist for as long as we're going to be around. I mean, one of the things that I think Roger and I can agree on is neither one will replace the other. They're both going to exist. They both have advantages. They both have disadvantage, and they both have overlapping type capabilities.
No, you're absolutely right. But you know what? I still want to go through some of the things that are myth and how can we separate what those two are? Like what's reality, what's not? How do they work together and how do they complement each other potentially? But we'll get to that by the end of all the rounds that we go through. I know we're still waiting on Roger. It seems like for the first time, it finally happened, Perry. We have a technical glitch in the live stream, but this only makes it feel more real for the first time. So we'll roll with it.
No,
in the meantime,
well, absolutely. There he is.
There he is.
Yeah, you're here. Were you worried, Roger? You know, what I'm gonna do with you guys is have Perry, you'll wear the Wi-Fi 6 hat for all intents and purposes. And Roger, I'll have you represent 5G. So the fact that you were just a little bit late, was that coincidental because you're a little worried about your competition here, or I'm just teasing? Oh man, see, he is worried, Perry. We froze him. This is what happens when you go, oh, there you're back. All right, are you ready to go to battle this out, Roger? Oh, Jay, you're not Roger. All right, you know what? We'll go ahead and get started, Perry, with the first topic, because I know that, as I said, you're well-rounded on all of these things. So until Roger gets here to defend his 5G stance, let's start with the first topic, which is really around high bandwidth, low latency. So we have digital world that we live in, right? Everything is digital, graphic intensive applications, streaming like we are today, edge computing, virtual reality, all kinds of things that are happening. How does Wi-Fi 6 and 5G really tackle, support, or prohibit high bandwidth, low latency capabilities?
Okay, that's a great question because contrary to belief out there is that the Wi-Fi 6 or the standard is 11AX and 5G actually came from the same place. If you go back to 2012, 2013, the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union, they tried to figure out what the mobile telecom will look like in 8 or 9 years. And they created something called IMT 2020, International Mobile Telecom in 2020. And it was all about what you were just said. We have to have massive numbers of people going to be supported. We have enormous amount of bandwidth we need to do, and the latency needs to be as low as possible. So they're talking about, 10 gig uplink and supporting thousands and thousands of people, and latency at like 1 to 3 milliseconds per milliseconds. Latency. And because they're looking at like real-time applications and self-driving cars and VR and AR type stuff. So in reality, both of these technologies, 5G on the licensed side and Wi-Fi 6 on the unlicensed side, we're kind of driving towards the same direction. And that's really important to understand because the honest to God truth here is that neither one of these technologies are going to replace the other. What's important to understand that, sometimes you got to use common sense and forget all the marketing hype out there. That cellular communication, which, 3G, 4G, LTE, 5G, the latest iterations and whatever, will always handle mobile voice much better than any other technology, because that's what it was designed to do. It was designed at that level of capabilities. Wi-Fi, on the other hand, will always handle huge amounts of data. Maybe not necessarily as time sensitive as real time, very much better than anything else. And the other areas, they overlap. They're good enough to support those technologies. So can 5G handle enormous amounts of data? Yes. Can Wi-Fi handle voice? Yes, because every one of us is doing voice over Wi-Fi. I mean, I'm doing video right now over Wi-Fi at my house. So they both have that capability, but it depends on what level do you need. As you said at the very beginning, 5G is never going to replace Wi-Fi, and Wi-Fi is never going to replace 5G, but there's certain use cases where I'm sorry that Wi-Fi will not do it as well as 5G will do it. And if you need that capability, if you need like 1 millisecond latency or whatever, you're probably going to look at 5G, and it works the same on the other side. So it's very, very important to realize that all the major organizations, the Wi-Fi Alliance, the Wireless Broadband Alliance, most of your consultants realize that these two technologies are going to collaborate and coexist forever. It's only a very small organizations or consultants that say, 5G is going to win and it's going to take over. It's not going to happen. You look at wireless right now, you got the 5G and the Wi-Fi 6, but you got ultra wideband, Zigbee, Z-Wave, BLE, Bluetooth. They're not replacing each other, and they do fit in there. So I'll kind of take a breath now and go back to you, Erica, or see if we got Roger back.
You know what, Roger?
Yes, I was knocked out in the first round. Oh my gosh.
I know. Actually, that was kind of perfect, given that this was a little bit of a battle. I was going to tell you guys at the very beginning, no going below the belt, but it looks like, Roger, we already did with you. So you're back. I was prepared to defend your position on your behalf. Why don't you give your take on 5G and high density, low latency use cases that we require in pretty much everything we do?
Yeah, I would say that low latency is just a brand new thing, and it's still not going to be something on the Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi still has a little bit of latency, but even on 5G, we're going to have latency there. But there are things we're putting in place from the operator's perspective to be able to lower that latency by putting the applications closer to the end users. But at the end of the day, it's all about the speed of light, and so whether that's Wi-Fi in a short distance or 5G from a long distance, it's all going to be a certain amount of latency in there, and we all have to apply that edge compute, whether that's in the Wi-Fi environment or in the 5G environment.
Yeah, absolutely. What I'm hearing from both of you both make very solid points. So I'm just going to go ahead and call this one a draw. In fact, I probably should give it to Roger because of the unfair blow. But what I'm hearing is, there's use cases for 5G where the high density, the high bandwidth, low latency, actually low latency fits better in some cases with 5G, because you talk about technologies like voice and video that really have very low tolerance from an end user perspective if any packets are dropped. So 5G might be the better scenario there. But when you look at the high bandwidth needs, the backhaul of the 5G network, or using the Wi-Fi infrastructure network to send to your cloud environment for data processing and things like that, where there's use cases for both, and they're really going to complement each other so that you can, your workflows are mobile. They're not going to be in one place. Sometimes you need one, and other times the other works better, right?
Yeah, a good way to look at that too. A good way to look at that is that if you look on paper, if you purely look at technology, 5G is going to win the latency battle. It is. Let's forget all this other stuff. But then you also have to look at the applications. Do I need 1 millisecond? Is 5 milliseconds good enough? And it's just like comparing technologies. Back in the 80s, if I need to fly to Europe, I could take a Concorde and spend an enormous amount of money and get there in 1/3 the time that a turbojet's going to get. But 95% of the people, the turbojet was good enough. And that's the way to look at it. And people hate using that term good enough. But that's very, very important to understand. Once again, if I need that very, very, very low latency, 5G is always going to have that check mark. But then you have to look at what do you actually need to support that application or service.
Yeah, it's going to come down to how it's actually deployed. So there you go. Go ahead, Erica.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, you guys did a great job of covering the first topic in round one, but we got the second topic to cover in round one, coverage. How does each technology handle the coverage and distance? Do you give up one for the other?
Well,
let's start with you, Roger. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think there's no way that Wi-Fi can ever run the coverage battle because of the amount of spectrum and the type of spectrum available. I mean, we're going from 600 megahertz up to 6 gigahertz, whereas in Wi-Fi we're limited to 2.4, 5, and now 6. But those are only the free-range spectrums that are available out there. But when I can cover multiple miles with 600 megahertz or 700 megahertz or even 850, which is what our operators are running on today, that's always going to run that coverage battle. But with coverage comes those other downsides, which is not as fast of speed and longer latency because you're still trying to go through that distance there. But I'll pass it back to defend your position.
Perry, yeah, Perry.
All right, thank you for.
Your turn.
Okay, thank you very much, Right. I would agree. One of the things I always say, and you can take it with a grain of salt or whatever, is that Wi-Fi is going to give you more bandwidth in a shorter area, whereas cellular will give you a much greater area, as you said, miles and stuff with cellular towers and all that stuff. So it really depends. Can I do that same thing with Wi-Fi? In theory, yeah, I could tack an AP up on every street corner. It's not. Is it possible? Yeah. Is it functional? Absolutely not. So obviously coverage is one thing that cellular communication was designed for, and it actually is a better way. Inside an environment, though, deploying coverage, it's much, much easier to deploy a bunch of small APs than put up a bunch of towers. So it depends on your deploy coverage versus deployed simplicity.
And that all changes on its head when you go to millimeter wave. Sorry, that changes on its head when we go to millimeter wave because that is even lesser than of distance and coverage, but it's so much more bandwidth that it's going to be a lot more capacity.
Yeah, you know what? You make a solid point there. The coverage when you go to the millimeter wave is significantly higher when it comes to the bandwidth. The upload download speeds that you get are amazing when you get right next to one of those towers. But what about the distance, though? That's where you really have to think about the design and what's right for your use cases. Perry, I see you boiling there. What you got?
No, once again, and Roger kind of led to this, is that to get millimeter, to get 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times more capacity, I have to have 4x times more towers. So I'm going to have to deploy, not necessarily towers, but I have to deploy a lot more devices because the higher bandwidths just don't propagate as far, whether we're talking about Wi-Fi 2.4 versus 5 or 6, or whether we're talking about, mid-band versus high-band type stuff on the carrier side. So everything is a balance, and we keep coming back to that. It's not a competition. It's like, driving down the road. I can't compare a pickup truck and a motorcycle. They both do very valuable things, but one doesn't replace the other.
Why not,
Agreed.
Perry? I'm just.
Well, they did try to make an El Camino
once. Pickup though.
That's true. That's true, Roger. Okay, so next topic. This little topic in the first round that we got here. So what about the public spaces, indoor versus outdoor? You talked about towers, Perry, and then you backtrack, said, well, actually, it could just be a device. But when we think about 5G, we're thinking about broadband. We're thinking about those towers, replacing all those LTE towers for this massive 5G global coverage. What about when we're indoor? Does Wi-Fi make more sense?
Wi-Fi makes more sense indoors for a couple of different reasons, for actually several different reasons. First of all, it's the incumbent. It's not going anywhere. There's somewhere between 13 and 14 billion Wi-Fi devices out there right now, and they're not going to be displaced. I mean, we've all got a cell phone. This cell phone has got Wi-Fi in it, and it either has 5G capabilities now or guarantee the next version will. But your printers don't. Your laptops don't. Your tablets don't. Your TVs don't. They don't have the cellular service. They don't have that license in there. So obviously, you're always going to have Wi-Fi indoors. Cellular is not going to displace Wi-Fi. There's going to be use cases for it in there, but it's kind of funny in a way that if I actually start deploying microcells or femtocells indoors, I have to connect those and backhaul those to the core network, and I might actually be using Wi-Fi to do that. So once again, they collaborate with each other. They don't replace each other. And no matter what you do, no matter how much cellular you deploy, you're always going to have Wi-Fi. Once again, I will guarantee that 95% of the people that are watching us right now are connected on Wi-Fi.
Oh, did you hear that, Roger?
I do, but there is one use case which you can't cover, Perry. So when we talk about large buildings and large spaces that have a very bad radiation pattern, I can change the frequency and go to private 5G or private LTE or even private millimeter wave. So I have several customers that are looking at Industry 4.0 that say, I want millimeter wave because I can put 2 access points up and cover a huge area in a building because it's inside. So there's where it might make a sense to run with 5G on certain applications. And, so that's on the indoor side. On the outdoor side, if I'm covering a large area, again, it's easier for me to go private. But private is a totally different use case than what a lot of people usually consume. We're more talking about our phones and our other devices that have Wi-Fi in it. But when we talk about machines and IoT and other things, we need to consider both 4G LTE or 5G in the future as an indoor or outdoor private network.
You make a solid point as a counter to Perry's claim there. So this is getting interesting. Finally, you guys have been playing so nice, but I like to hear the take. So I'm not going to antagonize. But when you talk about industrial IoT, Industry 4.0, that's a really solid example of one area where I see 5G being a really good fit, because a lot of those industrial environments in plants or distribution centers are in these remote areas where coverage is very difficult to get a service provider out there in some cases. And because their workflows are mobile, whether in this large plant area or out in the field, out in the oil field or whatever it may be, that mobility requires coverage that's more broadband-like, right? Because you're not going to have that connectivity with Wi-Fi access points out in the middle of nowhere in a field somewhere. So what do you think about, can you expand on the Industry 4.0 use cases?
So in the Industry 4.0, if we look at it, last year or a year before, Tesla put a new factory in their parking lot. Now, did they do that by running a bunch of wires? I bet they did, because they need that low latency and that guaranteed connectivity to the machines that are making the vehicles. But that is a pain in the, whatever, because you have to run a bunch of stuff. And as you're walking around, something might get broken. Running LTE or even Wi-Fi, depending on how it is. But a lot of times those environments are noisy from an RF perspective, and being able to switch the frequency to something that's less conflicted is maybe a better way of doing it. And that could be 4G or 5G. And that's why they're looking at 5G. And again, especially the millimeter wave side of things.
You know what?
I'm going to
I
take
like
you on
everything.
that, Ryan. I'm going to take Roger on that too, because one of the things that he mentioned is that, noisy environments, and it gets a little bit conflicted. What Wi-Fi 6 is offering beginning next year is 6E, the 6 gigahertz space, 4 times more spectrum available. Once again, it's still Wi-Fi. I don't have to learn anything new about LTE or anything. And I got a lot more spectrum to use with the OFDMA, the resource units, that be able to dedicate bandwidth to different devices. We're actually seeing a lot of interest in companies that just 9 months ago, we're looking at IIoT for machines and robots, and now they're thinking, wow, maybe I don't need CBRS or anything like that. Maybe I can look at 6E because I understand Wi-Fi. And why should I have to manage more than one wireless network? I understand deploying Wi-Fi, I understand the security of Wi-Fi. But once again, it's back to, it's not an MMA match. It's a WWE. Roger and I, we're going to tag team. There's certain areas that he's going to do better. I'm sorry, I can spin it all the way I want, but they're going to have a better solution. And I think I could win some too.
No, I absolutely think you're right. To your point about Wi-Fi 6E, what about interference? As I think that Wi-Fi 6 might have the upper hand when it comes to interference. I mean, when you talk about OFDMA channels and all the other features that come with Wi-Fi 6 that really make it so valuable and such a value add, as opposed to the other iterations of our Wi-Fi advancements over the years, where it's not just about speed. That interference and the efficiency of those channels could really help in these types of environments too.
Oh, absolutely. And getting a little bit into the getting a little bit into the techie type stuff. One of the problems that the Wi-Fi industry has done, for every 2 years we go to the customer where we got a brand new technology that's going to solve all your problems. And at some point, the boy who cried wolf, a lot of people don't realize that Wi-Fi 6 is actually different. It actually, prior to this, Wi-Fi 5 and earlier, even if I have 100 devices connected to an access point, only one person is talking at a time. No matter how many are associated, only one device talks at a time. With Wi-Fi 6, I can actually have multiple independent communications, so my latency gets better. I'm not just QoS, and so it actually does add a lot of advantages over the older technology.
Well,
And
you
I would
guys
agree
made
with
some
that because you're finally catching
strong.
up to LTE. I would agree with that. So it's finally there.
You know, that's a secret that most people don't know, is that a lot of people look at Wi-Fi 6 and say, oh, it's brand new technology, maybe I'll wait. The biggest key component of Wi-Fi 6 is something called OFDMA, orthogonal frequency distribution multiple access. That came out of the carrier side 15 years ago. So it's actually, we're implementing some of the technology that you guys finally proved it works, so now we can use it.
You're still ahead of us on
You guys,
QAM, though.
yeah. You guys are too much fun. I think I'm gonna call this one a draw for round one. You both have a place when it comes to the high bandwidth, low latency use cases. But let's keep tagging along with this industry 4.0 use case, because one of the things that you guys are good for, or Roger 5G, let's call it 5G, is good for, is that mobility coverage in those areas. But to Perry's point, what about the segmentation or the qualification of what kind of device is joining your network? So let's move into security for round two. Securing the network via segmentation, the virtual partitions of the network applications. Is it an IoT device? Is it a networking node? Is it an end user device? Is it a BYOD device from a plant employee or branch employee? How does 5G fare with the security aspects? I have a feeling this one's going to go to Perry, Roger, but I'm going to let you state your case.
Okay, because I think I'm going to win this one, because I think 5G is more secure in one way or another. But the first thing we want to cover is why do I think it's more secure? Well, there's only one way of securing the Wi-Fi, and that's with a password or a certificate or something like that. So there's no other way. So in LTE and 5G technologies, you have something and something you have. So it's like that two-factor authentication. I have a SIM card and I have a password, or I have the option to have a password. That's the first piece. But when we talk about different types of services, with 5G, we finally get into something called network virtualization. So we're actually virtualizing the actual 5G network per device or per application. I can actually change the network quality aspects and all that other stuff, and the security aspects of that network based on the SIM type and the application running on that SIM. So I get that ability to do what they call network slicing. So I'll pass it over to you, Perry. What do we got on that?
I actually like network slicing because a lot of people don't realize that 5G has two primary components. They got the new radio side and the network slicing, but Wi-Fi is actually a component that can actually participate in the network slicing. So the back end side, we can actually play with that also. On the wireless side, on the new radio side, obviously Wi-Fi 6, a couple things that it did. Obviously, Erica also mentioned before, I can do what's called resource units or segmentation. Don't want to call it Wi-Fi switching because there's a couple of SEs out there that flip out when you say that. But the whole idea is I can segment individual traffic, which ever used to be shared before. On top of that, with Wi-Fi 6, I actually mandate the support of WPA3, the latest security functionality. And there's also an additional functionality within Wi-Fi 6 that's what's called enhanced open. The ability to actually have a higher level of security without actually having to do passwords. Your client device and the access point it connects to will automatically set up a secure connection between the two. So there is a lot of enhancements, and the end user doesn't even have to know. So one of the things about security and Wi-Fi, one of the common terms is, I want to add security to the connection, but your grandmother's got to be able to do it. You don't have to understand how networking works to do it. And that's actually one of the things it offers. But once again, security in wireless is just like securing anything. It's a complete solution. So if you want to use a VPN on the end device, the more you can do, the better.
So Perry, love everything you said, but why do you have to bring grandma into it? I'm just teasing.
Yeah.
Because it has to be that easy. You're not going to go in there and try to reconfigure these devices, and try to set up, 802.1x and ACLs and all that stuff. It has to just work.
You mean just turning on your iPhone and they automatically come up with an encrypted channel straight to the tower is hard?
Or come up automatically and go direct to voice over Wi-Fi.
There you go.
Guys. Guys, it's getting heated in here. I'm loving it. Keep it up. Okay, so we talked about the segmentation, but what about applying policy, right? I mean, with knowing who, when, what, where, and why an individual is on your network, whether they're a guest or an employee, which was better to kind of streamline and facilitate the policy enforcement across a 5G and a Wi-Fi network? How does that work?
Well, I'll take the first one here. With the Wi-Fi network, obviously I can use analytics and find out who you are, what kind of device you're using, and I can apply policies based on your applications, based on what you're doing, based on a bucket I put you in. So if I identify you're a thermostat on the wall, I know that you generate only about 55K worth of data and you send it to this one server or whatever. And I can continually monitor that. And if tomorrow you're generating 300 megs worth of data and sending it internationally, I can automatically tag that as an issue and actually quarantine that device. Or if it's a fixed device and it starts moving, I can identify it. And that's a very, very important part, that it's not just the communication that occurs. It's also, obviously, I have to onboard the device, I have to monitor the device, but then also I've got to see analytics about that device. What is that device doing and how does it compare to other devices?
Okay. Very solid point. Roger, I'm going to go ahead and give you the opportunity to counter or complement that, because, they do work together.
So that is very good, and I will compliment that because, again, that's very similar to what we do in our products from the Cradlepoint perspective. We can do all those same type of functions, and it's not part of the Wi-Fi standard or the LTE standard, although in the LTE standard and the 5G standard with slicing, I can now enable or disable certain types of talking, and I can put Plaza in, but it requires the operator to have a level of control over that, which may end up being the customer has to pay more, which we don't want to have. So Wi-Fi makes it easier, but the same technology is there in 5G.
I got to put my marketing hat just for a minute on while we're here, because network slicing is extremely important. It really is. But we also do something very similar to that on the networking side, something we call Fabric, the ability to isolate users and isolate traffic. And it crosses layer 1 to layer 7. And I'm actually able to segment completely. So even if there's a threat on the inside or on the outside, they can't communicate with the other. So it's kind of a lower end, a device specific network slicing in a way.
Agreed. And shortest path bridging is the best thing since sliced bread. And I can guarantee that.
I'm glad you said that.
Isn't it, Roger? That's something we can all agree on. We've all had our hands on shortest path bridging. So moving on to the IoT point, though, very specifically, there is one feature, not necessarily about security, but since we're talking about IoT and segmentation and identifying types of device, what about the efficiency that Wi-Fi 6 enables with IoT devices with target wake time? I'll give you the chance first, Terry. Roger.
I'll tell you. I mean, there's if you look at the 11AX standard, there's probably about 20 or 30 different features that were in it. If you look at Wi-Fi 6, there's about 6 of them. OFDMA is the primarily one, and there's a couple others. But one of the other cool things is something called TWT, target wake time, and it's really a scheduling type functionality, but it's also as far as its efficiency, as far as battery life and that type functionality. Because a lot of times you've got IoT devices that maybe they don't talk a lot. Maybe they're a sensor, and I gather 24 hours worth of temperature and humidity, and then I upload it. That device doesn't have to be actively talking at any given time. But right now with Wi-Fi and the older technologies with Wi-Fi, if you don't talk, I just deassociate you. What this does is the access point in these individual devices can say, hey, go to sleep for 400 milliseconds or go to sleep for a lot longer than that, and it saves an enormous amount of battery life. And people don't necessarily think about it, but telling your phone to go to sleep for 400 milliseconds or 800 milliseconds continually, there's been some studies that have seen 4, 5, 6 times increase in battery life on your phone. We all got phones, and we all get annoyed when that battery is getting down to one block.
Yeah, and it happens so fast. Roger, is it worth the feature benefit for a customer if they want to go with the target wake time benefit of being able to efficiently operate and extend the battery life of their IoT devices that maybe aren't communicating very much when they really need the coverage benefits that they get from 5G? How do you balance between those?
So that's where the 4G and 5G standards bodies, the 3GPP, actually came up with lower bandwidth options. So we have NB-IoT, which is in the kilobit range, and it is designed to cover a large area and not actually use the spectrum. It uses the spectrum between the spectrum. And so it allows us to expand wide. Let's say I want to cover every parking meter in a city of Los Angeles. I can do that with a few towers that'll cover that area, and that type of sensor is a really good use case for NB-IoT, or what we call Cat1 or Cat M1, depending on how low we want to go in the amount of bandwidth. So the 3GPP, or the standards body that created all of the standards for wireless cellular, has really looked at that and made it something that's a big deal. Because I don't think I'd want to cover the city of Los Angeles or New York City with a bunch of Wi-Fi. I'd rather do it with something that's in a cellular perspective. So again, both work. It depends on whether the use case is inside or outside.
Absolutely.
Hey, wait a minute! A bunch of access points. That would be a great sale for the sales guy. You know.
Oh man, there's
obviously. Once again, that's a perfect use case for where that works better, because it's a lot of low bandwidth, but it's covering an extremely large area, which Wi-Fi just doesn't do as well. Let's just be honest about this stuff. But there's other cases which flip the end. So once again, Roger and I are having a lot of fun here, but it said we're going to coexist. We really are. We augment each other. We support each other. We coexist. We complement. I mean, that's the reality of it.
You're just like siblings. You know, you're gonna fight. You're gonna claim who's better. But at the end of the day, you can't live without the other. So that brings us to our closing segment here, our final round. I'm going to say congratulations. You both win. We're a mobile society, you know, whether we're working from home or we're driving to a coffee shop or we're going to the office, enjoying the outdoors, working at our kids' soccer game. That happens all the time. Or if we are actually at the office, we're connected. So it sounds like what I'm hearing is today we toggle between LTE and Wi-Fi all the time. What's the difference between Wi-Fi 6 and 5G? It's not going to be any different. There's going to be interoperability, and one's not going to replace the other. So tell me your final words about how the seamless handoff happens, right, between 5G and Wi-Fi 6, the interoperability. Roger, go from
you. We'll
start with you.
Perry. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll start with it. And that's actually important to understand, because, you know, one of the things with everything that's going on right now, obviously with COVID and all that stuff, Wi-Fi in our house has actually enabled us to actually go back to work wherever we happen to be, or go to school wherever we happen to be, or telemedicine and all that stuff. But as your point is, you know, I'm in my house and I'm on maybe Wi-Fi calling and whatever, and when I walk out the door, I lose that connection. I have to reestablish it and whatever. And there is some proprietary ways out there. But what's one of the things that we're very interested in right now is the Wireless Broadband Alliance. They're working on something called open roaming. The idea, and by the way, there's been proprietary technology doing this for probably a decade or more. But to be able to actually be on Wi-Fi and just seamlessly, when my Wi-Fi signal reaches a threshold or whatever, that I make before break, I can set up a cellular connection and I can seamlessly roam over without losing too many packets and work the other way behind. And that's, I think, very, very important, because for the most part, except for nerds like us, most people don't care how they're connected. They just want it to work. They don't care if it's, 5G, 4G, 3G, whatever it is, EVDA. They just want to be able to talk to the person they're talking to.
You're throwing a lot of big words at me, Perry, a lot of acronyms. I don't know what they mean, so I'm going to take them as disrespect. No, I'm kidding. All right. What I heard was you want to make it as easy for grandma to use, right? That's what Perry said earlier. We're going to roll with that. And Roger, any final statements for the interoperability?
I would say that it comes down to, there's a big bifurcation of LTE and 5G are good for the wireless WAN, whereas Wi-Fi is great for wireless LAN, or local area network. There's times when we cross over, but a lot of times we just are there as the intermediate. We could use the Wi-Fi going straight to cellular, as we have in some cases, or we could have, let's say, the police in New York City, or MTA. When an MTA bus comes in to the depot, it goes to Wi-Fi. When it goes out, it handles all those transactions over cellular. So there is a seamless handoff, and a device that handles that is the router of choice, and that needs to have both Wi-Fi and 5G or 4G involved on it.
I agree completely.
So better together.
See?
There you go. We're better together. There's use cases for both. Thank you both so much for joining me and helping me battle this out. You made it probably a little bit too much fun, but that's great. So if you want to hear more about Wi-Fi 6, 5G technology, and all of the latest advancements in Extreme Network Solutions, don't miss our Extreme Connect virtual event next week, September 16th and 17th. Register today for free. And we also have a lot of fun entertainment there waiting for you as well. So learn and have fun. Until then, everyone, that's all we have for Extreme Now Virtual. I'll see you next time.